We can't take anything for granted. I always tell people that you're good in a confirmation fight until you're not good. On the Friday morning of Pete Hegseth's confirmation, I woke up and we had the votes. We didn't count on Mitch McConnell. We counted on a tie break. But later on that day, Senator Tillis from North Carolina started to show some weakness. And we had to double down and have our action center send as many people as we could into his office. So you never know what type of last-minute curveball you'll get. But we also saw that with RFK Jr., but it went in a different direction. Everybody started breaking his way. Right? So I always tell people that you can't take any of these confirmations for granted. You got to continue to call and email your senators. You can do it multiple times, not just one and done. So you may have reached out to your home state senators when Kash was announced. You may have reached out to them when he came out of committee. Well, now you've got to reach out to them again as they do this procedural vote today. And then within the next 2 or 3 days when he's finally confirmed, reach out to them again. They need a constant drumbeat of grassroots activities so people know that the grassroots is with them.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
The State of Freedom is a listener-supported podcast. We're committed to pursuing the truth about policymaking, decisions, and situations in Louisiana and at the national level that stand to impact our freedoms.
Please become a monthly supporter of the State of Freedom at freedomstate.us as we continue to expand the voice of liberty across Louisiana and beyond.
Joining us today is a good friend of the show and our go-to man for the latest with the confirmations of President Trump's appointees. It's so great to have Mark Lucas back with us on the show today to walk us through the victories that have been won, the fights that we're in, and those on the horizon. And just a note to everyone, it's kind of obvious at this point, but I'm rolling solo today as my fearless co-host, Chris is in a meeting that came up last minute, so we'll miss him. But we wish him well in his meeting. And before we get into the conversation today on confirmations and the fights that we have on our hands, let me read the scripture of the day. It's 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. And it says, I might need to go to the eye doctor. My divinely loved friends, since you are resident aliens and foreigners in this world, I appeal to you to divorce yourselves from the evil desires that wage war within you. Live honorable lives as you mix with unbelievers, even though they accuse you of being evildoers, for they will see your beautiful works and have a reason to glorify God in the day he visits us. And the Lord's been speaking to me a lot lately about purity and holiness. And I believe the movement of God we're seeing on college campuses and in individuals is one that is birthing a great hunger and a desire for holiness. The scriptures command us to be holy because the Lord our God is holy. And that is not holiness as in religious acts, right? It's purity in our innermost selves, because that's the kind of purity that will overflow in all we say and do. In the Lord's eyes, there's no division between the secular and the sacred. He instructed us to do all of our work as unto the Lord, not just the parts that we think are religious. In Romans chapter 12, verse 1, Paul calls us to be living sacrifices, holy and set apart for service to the Lord. And he says that this kind of living in holiness and purity, is our spiritual act of worship. It's living this way that will cause the unbelievers we come across to wonder why we're different. Even as they bring insults and false accusations against us, they will know that there's something very different about us. And when all is said and done, whether they choose to serve the Lord or not, this passage tells us that they will draw the connection between our holiness, our way of life, and the Lord. So with that, let me bring in Mark. Mark, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You have been a busy man. Article 3 project has been in the middle of the ring here, fighting out some pretty big fights. Why don't we start from the top of the fights? So you came on the State of Freedom a couple months ago, and you were so vocal and so strong in your support of Pete Hegseth. He's been on the job now for, you say, about a month. And what's your estimation of how he's been doing? What's his job performance rating so far?
It's hard to believe that Pete Hegseth has only been our Secretary of Defense for less than a month, hasn't even been 30 days, but he's been able to really reset our warrior ethos in the military. He's been able to help President Trump advance his America First foreign policy objectives. And Pete's also assembled a great team. Let me kind of break that down. First, the warrior ethos. Early on, Pete renamed Fort Bragg. We went back to our namesake at North Carolina, a famous military base, and that really set a strong tone across the world that we are returning back to our fundamentals, warfighting and lethality. No more of this DEI wokeism that we saw plague our military over the last 4 years.
And Mark, I haven't had anybody break it down for me. Why did it get changed over to Fort Liberty in the first place? And what's the significance of the name Fort Bragg?
It was going back to these Civil War generals and this political correctness to rename everything, to remove these statues. And Fort Bragg, Fort Benning in Georgia, which is really near and dear to my heart. That's where I did my infantry officer training and my ranger training. They were just trying to rename all these facilities and forget our history. And so for a lot of us that grew up on these military installations, we find a real identity there. And for Pete to be able to say, hey, we're going back to Fort Bragg, sent a really strong message. And then also with recruitment, because of Donald Trump and because of Pete Hegseth, they've been able to help reinvigorate our recruiting numbers that were dismal underneath President Biden because of just the wokeism, but also because of the vaccine mandates.
Yeah.
Pete Hegseth has also said that we're going to bring these people back onto duty. We're going to restore their back pay. We're going to basically restore their dignity as service members, which was so critical. And then second, if you look at how he's went to Germany and how he's went to Poland, how he's been able to advance President Trump's America First foreign policy. You saw those famous images of him deadlifting with soldiers, running in the snow, doing push-ups with his hands in the snow in Poland. That sends a strong message, as Pete Hegseth was a former junior officer, that he stands shoulder to shoulder with our young men and women in uniform, which sent a strong message. But also in Ukraine, he sent a very strong and focused message that we're going to put America first, we're going to put peace first, and we're going to try to end these deadly wars. And then third, I would say, look at Pete Hegseth's team. Look at the people that he's been able to assemble. Any of Pete's team I know personally. I've known Pete Hegseth for over a decade. His senior advisor, Dan Caldwell, was the executive director for Concerned Veterans for America underneath my leadership. He did an incredible job advancing the Mission Act and all that accountability at the Department of Veterans Affairs. But then you've also got Darren Selnick, who is the acting undersecretary of Personnel and Readiness. He was a finalist to be the VA secretary. He brings a passion to reforming the DOD and the VA. Then you've got Sean Parnell as the senior spokesperson for the Pentagon, a guy who was a junior officer, an infantry leader like Pete and myself. Sean's got 2 Bronze Stars, a combat infantry badge. So Pete Hegseth in under 30 days has been able to reset the warrior ethos, bring in a world-class team, and really been one of the shining stars in President Trump's cabinet.
I'm excited to share a fantastic opportunity for State of Freedom listeners who are interested in investing in precious metals or even starting a home-based business in the precious metals industry. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. If you're just interested in purchasing metals at a great price, visit metalstacks.com/dwalker. Get to shopping. That helps me out. I get the commission. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. If you're interested in learning about the referral business aspect of Metal Stacks, email me directly at Danielle@freedomstate.us for more information.
I love it. And, we had a guest on not too long ago, JJ Carroll, who's a former Border Patrol agent. And one of the things we talked to him about was the fact that this administration is really bringing some masculinity back into governance. It's bringing masculinity back into male leadership. And I think that's something that's so amazing. And it's something that we're seeing with Pete as well. I saw, I was thinking about, as I saw, he's put out a couple of new commercials, recruitment ads, and they're fantastic. And it brought me back to when I was probably in high school. thinking about what I was going to do. Now, I'm probably the last person that needs to be recruited into the military. Let's be honest. But just this whole Top Gun kind of fast-paced, patriotic, very vigorous, winning mindset oriented military seems to be kind of stirring again. And I think that's going to get young men and women really activated to be in the military, because they don't want to be part of some wimpy group who can't even tell the difference between men and women. They want to be part of a lethal fighting force. They want to be on the winning side. If they have to be on a side, they want to be on the winning side. And I think Pete's bringing that, and it's so fun to see. It's so encouraging to see.
I agree. I love the new marketing campaigns that are basically just taking us back to the fundamentals. Young men and women, we joined the military, many of us, after 9/11, and we wanted to kill the people that were responsible for those terrible and heinous acts at the Pentagon, in Pennsylvania, and in New York City. And so our military is supposed to be a lethal fighting force, and we need to train for the unthinkable. And Pete and like Sean Parnell and Dan Caldwell, who was also a Marine, we understood what we were getting into when we enlisted after 9/11. We've wanted to fight the enemies of the United States. And the young men and women who raise up their right hand and swear an oath to the Constitution and put on that uniform, they don't want this wokeism. They don't want DEI. They can get that at a Kamala Harris rally.
Yeah.
They join to learn how to become a lethal fighting force. And the mission of our military is to close with and destroy the enemies of the United States in close combat. We train as hard as we can. We want to sweat here at home so we hopefully don't have to bleed overseas in combat. That's a part of the warrior ethos. And Pete Hegseth is really returning us to those fundamentals of shoot, move, communicate, stop bleeding. That's what we do as infantry officers.
And he's probably the first Secretary of Defense in a very long time to have the actual physical capability to be out there with the men doing PT.
That's leadership by example. You look at General Mark Milley, you looked at our former Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Those guys weren't physically fit. I also don't think they were that mentally competent either. When you look at the Bosch withdrawal in Afghanistan, but Pete's able to go into those formations and he demands respect because he lives by example. I love the fact that he was running in the snow. He was deadlifting with those guys. And he gave a speech recently where he said that as a junior officer, he used to run away from the flagpole. But as the Secretary of Defense, now he is the flagpole. What that means is at a company or battalion or brigade headquarters, you have the flagpole, you have the guidon for that element. And as a junior officer or as a enlisted guy, you want to be as far away from headquarters as possible. And Pete joked and said, I understand how it feels to be in your boots. I'm going to serve you, the warfighter. And that's a refreshing stance from our new Secretary of Defense.
It absolutely is. And speaking of refreshing, there's another big victory you guys won. We all won as Americans this past week, and that is the confirmation of RFK Jr., which was very iffy there for a while. Could you tell us a little bit about the fight there and what ultimately got us across the finish line with him?
Well, the Article 3 project has built this action center, and we're able to connect grassroots volunteers all across the country to their elected officials. And you can email them, call them, and you can light them up on social media in less than 3 minutes. And we've had over 55,000 people take over 200,000 actions since these confirmations started. And we launched these action centers in December. Kash Patel and Pete Hegseth, if you listen to the conventional wisdom in Washington, their nominations were dead on arrival. And Mike Davis and I, along with others at the Article 3 Project, went on a really intensive media campaign, driving people to the action center and putting heat on those United States senators. And Mike likes to say he gave some United States senators an attitude adjustment. But if it weren't for your listeners and people all across the country, we wouldn't be able to defend President Trump's nominees. And these senators, they have two different groups of people they can listen to. They can listen to the people in Washington, or they can listen to the grassroots. And the grassroots, our voice was louder and it was more effective, and we were able to defeat Washington.
That's amazing, including defeat Washington against our very own Senator Bill Cassidy, who was very squishy, very non-committal on this. Mark, we get these responses from our senators, and I'd love to hear if you get these kinds of responses or hear from other senators like this. We are taking all information in. We will let you know what we decide after we review all the information. Like, they refuse to give the people who put them in office a fair, solid, straightforward answer. What is up with that?
It seems like Republicans in the Senate tend to spend more time on their advise and consent role when it's Republican nominees. But when it was Joe Biden and his nominees, they sailed through.
Yeah,
so
the freaks on parade.
Exactly. I don't understand how these Republican senators, if they watched the same election results we did, when we saw that President Trump delivered every single swing state, how President Trump won the popular vote, how he had an electoral vote just landslide. I don't know if they were watching the same broadcast that we were. So they came in to Washington during that lame duck session. That's the period after the election, before the new Congress is sworn in. And several of them made some missteps. And they didn't early on adamantly support President Trump's cabinet. And they paid a political price. We saw all across the country. And I can tell you that the State of Freedom, that your guys' podcast is so impactful, because you're in Louisiana and you have the Speaker of the House, Johnson, in your home state, and you have Senator Cassidy, who's a consequential swing vote in the United States Senate. So that's one of the reasons why the Article 3 Project, we love coming on your podcast, because you have an outsized influence on some of the most key policy battles in Washington.
Well, thank you, Mark. And Chris's group, the Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, is also in the fight right alongside with the Article 3 Project, especially pushing Cassidy and Kennedy on these critical votes, because they are squishy. I don't know how else to say it. They're very squishy. They're very non-committal. Of course, Kennedy has the best sense of humor and one-liners of anyone in the entire Congress put together. But his votes, we'll see. We have to see where he lands on a lot of things. And so we've been doing a lot of pushing. So appreciate the kind words. And we always love having y'all come on. Other politicians, what's the future for politicians like Lisa Murkowski? She was, in my view, installed by really an anti-constitutional method of ranked choice voting. And Mitch McConnell, someone like him who seems to have more allegiance to the people of Ukraine and China than he does to America. What happens with these politicians who are blatantly defying the will of the people they sent to represent? This is like a bridge way past squishy.
We have to keep the pressure on. And a lot of politicians count on the fact that most people will not pay attention in off-election years. And the Article 3 Project, along with your podcast, we are changing that dynamic. I understand that our grassroots volunteers, they don't just care about politics in election years. They care about their country every day of every year. They want to stay engaged. So we're going to continue to inform the grassroots on how these senators are voting. And we're going to be able to connect them with their offices, both in DC and in their home states, so we keep the pressure on. Because if we just go back to our normal lives and we don't contact their offices and we don't hold their feet to the fire, they will start listening to Washington more than they'll listen to their home state. Yeah. So the future for these senators, I think they learned early on that President Trump's mandate is real. The grassroots are more energized than ever. And we're going to confirm every single one of Trump's cabinet picks. And now we're going to move on to immigration policy. We're going to move forward on taxes and spending. And these Republican senators, I think they learned really quick that they better be on the same page. It will pay for them to be on the same page sooner than later.
Yeah. And, I think the work that DOJ is doing and all that they're uncovering, Mark, and just the reckless, and not just reckless, but honestly, a lot of it was very purposeful misuse of American taxpayer funds, and all of this screaming from the left about, why we need to not have transparency. I saw Maxine Waters get up and say from a podium, someone asked her, why are you so worried about transparency? And she said, because we don't know how much they know about us. My jaw hit the floor. I was like, wow, this is the very definition of saying the quiet part out loud. But this kind of stuff, we thought the election was a tough fight, and it was a tough fight in and of itself. But the American people are pissed. Super pissed. I mean, just getting people to pay their taxes this year is going to be, I think, a challenge, because we've seen how poorly our funds have been used.
Well, I'll say that Elon Musk and Doge are uncovering a bipartisan problem. These problems with Social Security payments and with Medicaid fraud, they've existed for a long time. It wasn't just over the last 4 years with President Joe Biden. We've had Republicans in charge of Congress. We've had Republican presidents. This is a decades-long problem that took Elon Musk and his team, his small team of engineers, to discover in less than 30 days. Just imagine what else we're going to uncover over the next 4 years. And I agree with you as a taxpayer. I think there may be the need for a moratorium on us paying our income taxes until the federal government gets their house in order.
Yeah.
These politicians and these bureaucrats, they work for us, the American people, the citizen, the voter. We are their boss. They serve us. And we are not getting a return on our investment. We need to uncover all this waste, fraud, and abuse. And we need to reset the power structure. It's the grassroots and the American people that are in control, not Maxine Waters, not unelected bureaucrats.
Yeah. And maybe some of these legislators need to have their paychecks suspended until they get on the right side of this issue. So many of them, lockstep, voted for omnibus after omnibus without finding out what in the world was in it.
Now, you bring up a great point about the omnibus. Due to all the waste, fraud, and abuse that Elon Musk has uncovered, when we get to the omnibus and we get to spending, it's going to be very hard for these politicians to ask for more and more money. So I think this puts us in a really good position when we start looking at spending, when we start looking at department by department audits. I'm very happy to see that Elon's going to audit the IRS. I think that's a political winner. The American people have been unhappy with the IRS for decades. And we're going to reset the established order here, that the grassroots are going to be in control, that we're going to start driving these policy outcomes, because the people in Washington, they failed us for way too long.
Yeah. And, Mark, one other thing about Doge is that it is shining a light that this is possible. And it's putting pressure on, I believe, state governments to get their houses in order, because our budgets at the state level are obviously much, much smaller, but the waste is just as vulgar as it is at the national level. So I am prayerful and will be very vocal about that happening in Louisiana. And I'm sure listeners across the country are wanting to see an accounting for where their state tax dollars are going as well.
Absolutely. I think several states have set up Doge-like entities to take a look at waste, fraud, and abuse. It happens at every level of government. These politicians, they're lazy. These bureaucrats, they're unaccountable. So we're going to be able to see large savings all across every spectrum of our government, which is going to be good for taxpayers, but also is going to really wake people up to say, I need to pay attention to what my politicians are doing every day of the year, because there's just so much at stake. Think about this. We almost lost our country. The last 4 years of Joe Biden were a complete disaster. We saw lawfare like we never seen before. We saw out of control spending. We saw no accountability. And the America that we once knew didn't exist anymore. And if it weren't for President Trump, we would not have this constitutional republic. I truly believe that. So it gives us a second chance as citizens to reassert ourselves and say, we are in control. We're going to demand results from our federal and state and local government.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Patel, all eyes are on him. The memes are out of control. I'm absolutely obsessed with the memes of Kash Patel and his laser eyes with his gladiator outfit on. Article 3 project has an action item up on Kash. He is set for, I believe, a vote today. Tell us what's going on with Kash. What do you expect to happen?
Kash Patel has been the most popular nominee from President Trump. the Article 3 Action Center has seen more grassroots activity in support of his nomination than any other person. And it's because of what we saw with this weaponized Department of Justice, the weaponized FBI, this unprecedented and illegal lawfare that was waged against President Trump, and parents who were going to school board meetings, old ladies who were praying in front of abortion clinics. This unprecedented lawfare has delivered us the opportunity to bring in a reformer like Kash Patel to the FBI. So the Article 3 Action Center has an alert where you can call, email, and you can light up your senators on social media saying you need to support Kash Patel because we need to bring desperate reforms to the FBI.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have that in the show notes for everyone. And I believe Chris has one up as well. So we'll make sure. I mean, I'm just going to do both of them because what's it going to hurt? Okay, this is a very serious question. Is there anything you can do or we can do as citizens to make Watermelon Head Adam Schiff cry harder than is there anything we can do besides getting Kash Patel to make him cry harder?
I don't know. You're seeing these senators just lose their minds on some of these nominees. And I think President Trump, along with J.D. Vance and these other leaders like Kash Patel, Pete Hegseth, have really broken the Democrat Party. And if you look at people like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., former Democrats who have switched sides, who are in this new Republican administration, they pose a serious threat to the Democrat Party. So I think when you see Schiff and Maxine Waters and these people during these confirmation hearings, these Democrats really lose their minds, is because they realize the end may be near. They feel the heat from the American people. They know how hard it's going to be to cover up their crimes. I just saw recently that there's been a record number of searches on Google for how to wipe hard drives, how to hire personal attorneys. Washington, they are shaking in their boots right now, and they should be, because I believe they broke serious federal crimes or federal law, and they need to be held accountable.
They do need to be held accountable. Mark, you know, I was even thinking about the political elite, the political class has been losing their collective minds, but also the media class has been losing their minds. Caroline Leavitt, 27-year-old, just blowing them out of the water every single day she shows up. And I think one thing that Trump's nominees or picks have been is incredibly strong and relentless and unapologetic. I think that about Stephen Miller. He's out there every single day just completely slinging punches and not taking any crap. He's not accepting the garbage premise that they give him. Caroline Leavitt's out there with the receipts every single day of the week. It's just a beautiful thing to see. It's great to feel like not just the momentum, but for so long, people on the right have felt, walked on eggshells and tiptoed around people's feelings and, wanted to be the compassionate conservatives or whatever kind of nonsense came out of the 90s to make us feel like we couldn't actually fight. And this crew of people are fighting hard.
We are so honored to be affiliate partners for General Michael Flynn's movie, Flynn, Deliver the Truth, Whatever the Cost. Support General Flynn and the State of Freedom by shopping the Flynn movie store directly from the button on our homepage at freedomstate.us or through our affiliate link, flynnmovie.com/TSOF podcast. On that site, you can purchase the DVD, which comes with a streaming link. You can pick up Flynn movie merchandise and get his complete 5GW book series.
And one of the reasons the media is just losing it is because I think they were lulled into a slumber by Sleepy Joe and his sleepy administration. They put lids early on in the day. They held hardly any press conferences. His cabinet were ineffective. They weren't like Pete Hegseth, great communicators. They weren't like Donald Trump, who was signing a bunch of executive orders in the Oval Office as he was taking questions from the press. President Trump is dictating an incredible pace, and the media can't keep up. There's only so many producers, there's only so many writers, and they can't keep up with just the amount of activity that's coming out of this administration. And like I said earlier before, Pete Hegseth, it's hard to believe he hasn't even been SecDef for 30 days. He's already done international trips. He's already met with people from NATO, with Ukraine. He's resetting the policy discussion here in America on the border, along with Tom Homan. He's been everywhere. Same thing with Tom Homan, with ICE. These guys are relentlessly pursuing these illegal aliens who are coming in and conducting crimes. The media can't keep up on top of all these executive orders. So we see President Trump, a man with a mandate, a man with incredible energy, who's bringing the reforms as this country desperately needs. And that's why his popularity is at an all-time high.
It is. And I have been saying that the media and the politicians have been drinking from Niagara Falls, not just a fire hose, but Niagara Falls with Trump's just blistering pace. It's amazing. Just to get back to the activist judges that we, talking about Kash Patel, talking about the weaponization of the federal judiciary against the American people, J6ers, and like you said, moms and dads who went to school board meetings, Catholics in particular. Will Article 3 project play into the impeachment of any of these anti-constitutional political activist judges? And do you think Kash is going to be going after them, or what's the appropriate route even for going after them? I've seen, it looks like some members of Congress have filed some articles of impeachment against several.
The Article 3 project will continue to hold these judges accountable, just like we filed judicial complaints against these guys during the unprecedented lawfare against President Trump. We'll continue to call them out and name them and shame them like Mike Davis has done. There are some potential conflicts of interest as well. You see these judges who are trying to obstruct President Trump's policy objectives.
Yeah.
And there's some of these judges who have ties to USAID, who some of their wives have received payments from different nonprofits that may have ties to USAID. So there's a lot of serious allegations that are floating around about the intent of what these judges are doing. And what we're seeing is that these judges, they weren't elected by the American people. They're obstructing the will of our citizens. And they're also violating President Trump's ability as the commander-in-chief, as the president of the United States, with his Article 2 authority over the executive branch. So the Article 3 project will continue to monitor this and will hold these people accountable.
Awesome. I'm very happy to hear that. Now, what's the next fight that you guys have your sights on? What comes after Kash?
Say right now, it's all Kash Patel. We can't take anything for granted. I always tell people that you're good in a confirmation fight until you're not good. On the Friday morning of Pete Hegseth's confirmation, I woke up and we had the votes. So we didn't count on Mitch McConnell. We counted on a tie break. But later on that day, Senator Tillis from North Carolina started to show some weakness. And we had to double down and have our action center send as many people as we could into his office. So you never know what type of last minute curveball you'll get. But we also saw that with RFK Jr., but it went in a different direction. Everybody started breaking his way, right? So I always tell people that you can't take any of these confirmations for granted. You've got to continue to call and email your senators. You can do it multiple times, not just one and done. So you may have reached out to your home state senators when Kash was announced. You may have reached out to them when he came out of committee. Well, now you've got to reach out to them again as they do this procedural vote today. And then within the next, 2 or 3 days, when he's finally confirmed, reach out to them again. They need a constant drumbeat of grassroots activities so people know that the grassroots is with them. So that's why I would say is we're focused on Kash Patel. We'll also be focused on confirming a great amount of judges for President Trump. That takes us back to our core mission. The Article 3 project was founded to confirm really good constitutional judges, but also to beat back against bad judges as well. So we're returning back to our core competency, which will be the judicial branch.
Awesome. Well, keep your foot on the gas. We will do the same. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. For all of our listeners, please do plan to join us on Thursday, same time at 10 Central. We will have with us Cade Brumley. Dr. Cade Brumley is the state superintendent of schools in Louisiana, talking about some wins that our state is seeing with education. Mark, any last words from you before we let you go?
I just want to thank you and what you guys are doing in the state of Louisiana. You've been so critical to help us pick up key votes from Senator Cassidy, and you're going to be very pivotal too as we get to some of these spending battles in the House of Representatives The Speaker of the House is from Louisiana. So I want to thank you so much for what you guys are doing. You're true grassroots champions.
Well, it's our pleasure, and we will do our best to make you proud. We're going to keep our foot on the gas as well. Thank you so much, Mark. We'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.